Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed, and today we're going to be continuing with our overview videos of other factions other than the Imperium. And today we are going to be focusing on the Eldar. Now, specifically the Craftworld Eldar, as there are actually several Eldar races in the Warhammer 40,000 lore, and we will go over them in other videos. Now, the Eldar themselves are a race of humanoids with origins that lie in the distant past of our galaxy, and whose empire once spanned the entire length of our galaxy, and their fall left them scattered across the remains of that empire, the remnants of a slowly dying race. Out of the lore, their appearance mirrors that of the elves from the Warhammer fantasy universe, and they also seem to mirror Tolkien's elves in his own lore. Now, the background to the Craftworld Eldar starts in the history of all Eldar many millennia ago. Today they are a race on the verge of extinction, with their numbers a sliver of a fraction of what they once were. However, even in such a condition, they are still a major force in this galaxy. Now, the origins of the Eldar lie millions of years in the past, when they were created by the Old Ones, an exceptionally powerful species that rose to power in the dawn of our galaxy. The Eldar remember very little of that time so long ago, and what is remembered is told through allegory and song, losing much of its origins and becoming more fanciful through each retelling. All they know is their creators fell along with the enemy of the Old Ones, leaving the Eldar as one of the most dominant forces in the galaxy. They secured this dominance through a mass cull of many of the other species alive at the time, including humanity, and returned to their homeworlds to advance and develop into a truly extraordinary galactic superpower, ruling a significant portion of the galaxy and secure in the knowledge of their achievements and power. This remained constant until roughly 10,000 years ago, when the Eldar's arrogance would lead to their own downfall. In this time there were other species that rose to power, and also fell from power around them, but the Eldar's technological strength and ancient knowledge kept them superior to all who challenged them. However, the Eldar's time of dominance would come crashing down in an event known only as the Fall. With their technology at the peak of its dominance, the psychically attuned Eldar were freed from almost all work or labour, so they indulged in pleasure that was beyond hedonism, taking such actions to the extreme beyond that of any other race, with pleasures that slowly became darker and more sadistic as time went on. Some Eldar rejected this way of corrupt hedonism, and seers warned of dark times ahead if they did not stop their indulgences. Because of these warnings, or maybe just because they were disgusted with the way their society was going, many Eldar left the Empire, resorting to living on more primitive worlds at the outer edges of the Empire. Whilst this sort of hedonism would mark the decline of any other race, for the Eldar these indulgences were far more dangerous, for their souls reflected very strongly in the warp, collecting energy together in the warp that lay in the same area as their empire, and it began to coalesce, throwing out disruptive energies into the warp and making travel almost impossible for other species throughout the galaxy, which also led to the Age of Strife for mankind coincidentally. As their vices grew, this collection of psychic power did as well, until eventually it came into a life of its own. It tore its way into being and became the Chaos God Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, Devourer of Souls, and Doom of the Eldar. The psychic scream of its birth tore the souls from all the Eldar within 1,000 light years of it, and was powerful enough to rip the barriers between the material universe and the warp apart, forming a gigantic warp rift at the core of the Eldar Empire, forming what we now know today as the Eye of Terror. The worlds of this empire were consumed, torn apart or falling into the hell of the warp to exist in limbo for all eternity and become the Crone worlds filled with damned Eldar souls. This was the fall of the Eldar, and perhaps not coincidentally the beginning of the Great Crusade on Terra, although that story will be told at another time. Now, those who had predicted this fall were either beyond its wrath on the outskirts of the Empire, known as the Exodite worlds, or had escaped the core worlds in gigantic spacecraft larger than any city today, known as the Craftworlds. Many of these vast arcs were actually consumed by the psychic backlash of the birth of Slaanesh, but many survived, and today are home to the last remnants of a race, and today are the homes of the last remnants of those who resisted the pleasures of hedonism and took the higher path, now known as the Craftworld Eldar. Now, there are other Eldar who actually survived within the Webway, protected in the city of Commorragh, a city that even today still clings to the hedonistic and sadistic ways of their ancestors, even more so than the Eldar Empire did at the time, becoming the core of the Dark Eldar, whose story diverges here and will be covered in another overview video. Now, to move on to the biology of the Eldar, they appear superficially very similar to humans, although they are generally taller and slimmer with quite sharp features and very pointed ears, as is stereotypical of elves in fantasy universes. They are also very long-lived by human standards and may live more than 1,000 years unless they are killed in an accident or die from disease. They also have a faster metabolism than that of humans, and their cardiac and neurological systems are far more advanced. These traits manifest in vastly heightened reactions and agility compared to humans. To them, humans seem to almost move in slow motion, and with a certain degree of awkwardness, while to humans, Eldar can move with a distracting grace and can be blindingly fast in combat. All Eldar are natural psychers, which has influenced their technology to a great degree, and the Eldar who encourage this power seem to live even longer than their other kin. Now, the Eldar seem to reproduce in stages, with new genetic material being added by the father to the developing embryo over an extended period. This process is of course ill understood, but Eldar autopsies have suggested it. However, the process of reproduction is both slow and rare, leading to the decline in what is now seen as a dying race, although the Eldar of course would not admit such a failing and would never want to change the way that their race is conceived, a gift given to them by their gods, which I will now talk about now. As the Eldar are actually a very spiritual people, and their culture is based around mythological cycles. The most famous of these cycles is the War in Heaven, an epic conflict between Eldar deities, with two factions led by Vol, the god of the forge, and Kila Mensha Cain, the god of war. With two exceptions, the pantheon of the Eldar is now considered to have been destroyed by the birth of Slaanesh. However, the Eldar still revere their dead gods, and believe the day will come when they will be reborn, and will lead the Eldar back into a time of power and greatness. Now, the Eldar's technology is based around their latent psychic abilities, and it is mainly actually grown from a psychically reactive substance known as Wraithbone. Wraithbone is brought forth from the warp and shaped by bone singers through psychic power. It is used to create Craftworlds, their tanks, other vehicles, weapons and armour. It is also a psychic conductor, and so not only provides the structure for things to be built, but also power distribution and communication. Wraithbone is a highly resistant material and is capable of limited self-repair, acting more like plant matter than actual building materials. Now, the Eldar armory is quite interesting and includes a variety of shuriken weapons which use gravitic forces to fire molecule-thick discs at the enemy. They also use powerful energy weapons which can cut through armour like a hot knife through butter, which is known as lance weaponry and will be expanded upon in the Eldar weaponry video during the Eldar block of videos. Now, another piece of technology used by the Eldar at all times is a spirit stone. Now, when the Eldar die, their souls are in danger of being devoured by Slaanesh. To prevent this, the Eldar wear these spirit stones which capture and contain their souls at the moment of death. These stones are then collected and inserted into the Craftworld's infinity circuit, keeping their souls safe from she who thirsts. Now, a final piece of technology I want to talk about, which is one of the most important used by the Eldar, is the Webway. Now, the Eldar do not travel through the warp in the same manner of any other race, having long ago developed a much faster and safer method of travel known as the Webway. This is a system of ancient tunnels through the warp which completely isolate it from its inherent dangers. It is best imagined as a vast tangled network of doorways between fixed positions in real space, by which the Eldar can travel far more rapidly than most other races, although if there isn't a Webway gate in a certain system, they will take a lot of time to actually get there. Now, the Webway has fallen into disrepair since the fall, and is now much more dangerous to travel for the Eldar, and in fact a lot of its paths are now lost, known only to a certain few. Now, an interesting side note is the Emperor was actually attempting to recreate the technology of the Webway on Terra, and had nearly succeeded when the Siege of Terra began, and it is thought the reason he still remains on the Golden Throne is because he is keeping closed the Webway gate he created on Terra, preventing the forces of chaos from entering the reality on the homeworld of humanity. Of course, this will be explained in more detail in our Horus Heresy videos. Now, back to the Eldar. The society of the Craftworld Eldar is of course focused around their Craftworlds. They were grown in a time of great fear and loaded with some of the last uncorrupted people from that ancient empire, and so most of the Craftworlds have seen service since the fall, filled with Eldar that now follow the Path, a set of principles focusing their massive range of skills and psychic talent on one occupation or skill, be it artist, warrior, poet, seer, etc., to prevent themselves from being lured by the path of hedonism and falling to she who thirsts. Now, there are many Craftworlds in the galaxy, and here are some of the most well known. The first is Alitok, far out on the frontiers of the galaxy on the edge of explored space. The Alitok Eldar are zealous in guarding against a touch of Slaanesh, and even more so than other Craftworld Eldar, and can lead many of the Eldar who feel confined in this system to seek the path of the outcast, although they will always return in times of need for this Craftworld. Another Craftworld is Altansar, a small Craftworld that had been on the edge of the psychic shockwave when Slaanesh was born. It was thought this Craftworld had been lost to the Eye of Terror, but recent sightings near such wound in reality have questioned its fate. Now the next Craftworld is Biel-Tan, the most martial of all Craftworlds. Biel-Tan has decided to reforge the Eldar Empire one world at a time. It has a large cadre of elite aspect warriors, and a large citizen militia to use in times of need. Another Craftworld to mention is Yanden, once one of the largest and most prosperous of all the remaining Craftworlds. However, then the Tyranids invaded. Although they were fought off, the Craftworld is now a ruin, with many areas which are still unrepaired and a population spread very thin. Its military now relies on the Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords, spirits which control Wraithbone constructs to protect the Craftworld from outside threats. Another Craftworld is Saim-Han, one of the most barbaric and wild of the larger Craftworlds. It uses warriors which favour rapid strikes and fast-moving battles, preferring to use the ubiquitous Eldar jet bike rather than sending warriors in on foot, preferring speedy raids to drawn-out battles. Now the final Craftworld I want to mention today is Webway, one of the largest Craftworlds. It was caught in the pull of the Eye of Terror and now orbits around it. As such, it faces constant danger and attack by Chaos Marauders, and has served as a bastion against the Dark Powers for the Eldar for thousands of years. Now a little more about the Craftworlds. They probably compose the majority of the surviving Eldar race, although it is impossible to say just how many this is. They are certainly the seat of the remaining Eldar industry, technology and culture, although these are only a shadow of what has been lost. Most Craftworlds contain special biodomes which house plants and wildlife from their original world, now long lost, and are carefully tended to maintain their integrity. Although the Craftworlds could be considered independent states, they do band together to aid one another in times of need. However, they will also fight one another if a dispute grows too large for diplomacy. Now also, every Craftworld contains an infinity circuit, as I've mentioned previously, which is essentially the Wraithbone skeleton of the Craftworld itself. Within this matrix are the souls of all the Craftworld's dead residents in the form of a group consciousness, providing both a well of psychic power for the ship and a massive ancestral mind to advise and guide the living. These minds are taken from the spirit stones of the Eldar, and it's the closest thing the Eldar now have to an afterlife, and so why they defend their Craftworld so viciously when it is attacked, for it is their last chance at a peaceful life, not being consumed by Slaanesh in the bowels of the warp. Now a small group of Eldar I would like to mention are the Exodites, who actually live on planets rather than Craftworlds, and who moved there before the fall of the Eldar, as they preached against the excesses of their society and decided to move to a more rural existence in order to avoid the hedonism of their culture. Now, today they are mainly focused on an agricultural existence with a low level of technology, although they remain in contact with the Craftworlds should they need aid from their Craftworld brethren. One final group I want to briefly mention are the Harlequins. Now, the Harlequins follow the Eldar god, the Great Harlequin, known as Kegorach, or the Laughing God, who was one of the only two Eldar gods to survive the fall. They are as mysterious as the god they serve, and are some of the only Eldar who still navigate through the Webway regularly. We'll do more on them in their own video in the Eldar block of videos. Finally, I just want to give a little more detail on the Eldar paths, as I mentioned previously. These are followed by all Eldar who live on the Craftworlds who underwent complete social reform after the fall of their empire. Every Eldar chooses and follows a path somewhat similar to a profession until achieving mastery over it. They then choose another path and the process begins anew. It is unknown how many paths there are, and all are dangerous for the Eldar, for sometimes an Eldar can become so focused upon his path that they will never leave it, and so will either become a master or stuck in a profession that they'll never be able to master themselves. Now, before I go, I just want to talk a little bit out of lore about the inspiration for the Eldar. As mentioned, the Eldar mirror the Warhammer fantasy elves, and they actually also follow Tolkien's own elves, having a similar backstory, and in fact sharing a name, because in the Tolkien mythology, the elves are also known as the Eldar. Now, the culture of the Eldar is taken from many ancient civilizations, ancient Egypt, the ancient Celts, ancient Greece. Now, there are also parallels between the Eldar culture and feudal Japan, particularly the samurai, with the path of the Eldar being very much like the way of the samurai, i.e. Bushido, and they also use shuriken weapons. So you can see there's this interesting parallel between human cultures and the cultures of the Eldar. Also, Cain, the war god of murder, is also analogous for the Hindu deity Kali, who is also seen as the destroyer, and so you can see where they have taken influence from real-world ancient cultures to create the Eldar in order to give them a sort of sense of history, focusing mainly on ancient cultures rather than the more modern ones we see today. So that's everything I wanted to say on the Eldar in this overview video. I hope you found it interesting. If you've got anything you'd like to ask or anything you'd like to add, you can leave it in the comments section below. You can also go to the Vaults of Terra forums, the Vox Relay, which will be linked in the description below, which has a lovely community of people who should be be able to help you and answer questions that you may have. You can also go there to ask me a question specifically, or vote on what you'd like to see next on the Vaults of Terra. You can also contact me by personal message through the Vaults of Terra website if you have a question that you'd like me to answer. Now, that's everything I wanted to mention on the Vaults of Terra today. There will be another Imperial Regiments video coming out next time, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time on the Vaults of Terra.